Hey, all, welcome to the podcast. I am super excited for you to meet Stephanie Spaulding today. Stephanie is running for Senate in Colorado. She is fantastic. We've become friends over the last couple of weeks, actually. And I am really excited about her candidacy, about who she is, about how she does it. She pastors an African-American church in Colorado Springs. She ran for Congress there in 2018. She's a professor and does her work both, with college students, and she's also thinking about how she can be part of the common good. She works in women and ethnic studies. She's running for Congress or running for Senate. It's just she's terrific. Her energy is great. I think you're going to love her. I would really encourage you to go to her website, stephanie4co.com. The co is for Colorado, Stephanie4co. So Stephanie and then the word FORCO.com. Contribute some money, chime in. Look, if you want to support someone who you think can be a real change maker, Stephanie's great. I love where she is on the politics. I like where she is on the personality. I like where she is on the policy. I am all in. So here's 40 minutes of me being a fanboy around Stephanie Spaulding running for Senate in Colorado. Hey all, Doug here, and talking with Stephanie Spaulding, my new favorite friend and favorite Senate candidate of them all. Stephanie Spaulding is running for the Senate seat. First, she has to get the endorsement. She has to get the what's
primary nominee.
Yeah, you have to become the primary nominee as a Democrat running in Colorado. So congratulations on that. And if you haven't yet already, go to stephaniespaulding.com.
It's Stephanie for Colorado. So Stephanie for FORCO.com.
And look her up and, follow the link to her Facebook stuff below and all that stuff. And Stephanie, so excited to chat with you today. Tell us the story. When I first heard about you, it was there is a woman pastor in Colorado Springs running to be the congresswoman with the Democratic endorsement in Colorado Springs, and I thought that is fantastic. That was all a year ago, and now you're running for Senate. But tell us what you're up to and who you are and what you're doing in Colorado.
I am Stephanie Rose Spaulding, and I'm professor of women's and ethnic studies here at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. I am tenured and chair of our program. I am also pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. I lived in Colorado for about 9 years now and came to Colorado to teach at the university. I did not think that I would ever run for office, even though I've been civically and politically engaged. I've done a lot of activist work. The work that we do in women's and ethnic studies is practical and not just theoretical. So I've done a lot of work in community and even have helped other candidates run for office before, but I never saw myself running for office until the Trump effect.
Bum, 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 bum. Yes.
2016 happened, and it's interesting for me because as a person that studies critical whiteness studies as well as masculinity studies, I wasn't necessarily blindsided by the fact that he got elected. Mm-hmm. What I was just really surprised about was the way that it hit my students and the way that it hit community members that I know, even colleagues that I know who study very much the same work that I do in terms of critical whiteness studies. They were just really surprised that in the 21st century of the United States, this type of person could get elected. And not only were they surprised, they were devastated and really in this paralysis of despair. So for me as a professor and community member, even as a minister, it's a really hard place when people are looking at you, not rhetorically, but very seriously asking, what is the point? What is the point in all of this?
These were your students that are taking courses, and they're saying, like, if this is the world we live in, why are we screwing around with this? Yeah.
So having to wrestle with that in November of 2016 and to respond to them, because they were looking for a genuine answer about what is the point, it was a moment for me to step into this space and really provide a direction forward. So part of it was calling for the reality that we have been at this work for centuries, right? That this is not the first time. And when we face moments like this is when we need to commit ourselves that much more to the work of social justice, to the work of dismantling systems of privilege and oppression. And I reminded them, what if the suffragists had given up in year 98, not knowing that it would take 100 years before women would gain the right to vote? What if people in the abolitionist movement had given up, not knowing how long it would take to actually abolish slavery as they knew it in the United States, because we still have slavery here in the United States. That's another conversation.
Yeah.
And so again, really like getting them to dig deeper and to know that we rest on the shoulders of individuals who were faced with these watershed moments and said, we still have to persevere. We have to commit ourselves that much further. And then I also went to the Women's March in 2017 in Washington, D.C. And just the energy there helped me to really begin to see and connect the dots that the work that I was doing in the classroom had to be taken to a larger level, and that level being Congress. For us in social justice movements, social justice practice, there is a proverb, right? Where we talk about doing the work upstream. And we can see where in some instances, and according to the proverb, that there are babies floating in the river and they're drowning. And so communities will wrap themselves around like pulling the babies out of the river, right? But someone has to have the wherewithal and the insight to ask the question, why are the babies being put in the stream in the first place? And they have to leave the community to go further upstream and to ask those questions and to figure out what is causing the problem. And so for me, as a professor who has been invested in studying this work for so long, now is the time to look further upstream at what is actually causing the kinds of injustice that we see today. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the law is constructed to begin with.
Wow.
If our beginnings are flawed, the impact will reflect those beginnings, right? So again, that's how and why I stepped into running for a federal position. I know that local electoral politics matter, but for the work that is most important to the people that I know who suffer the most, that work is upstream. That's how I came to run for the U.S. House. And afterwards, we started a movement. We garnered 126,000 votes in a district that the state party knows is the hardest lift of the entire state. It had never been done by
Colorado Springs, Colorado. That had to be
Colorado Springs, El Paso County, home of some really fantastic ideas.
And some very aggressive conservative Christians in those places.
Right.
Hey, so here's a question I have for you, because a lot of people think about these issues, and you are, as a professor and someone who studies women and ethnic studies, and you had a great phrase where you said you're quite familiar with masculinity and whiteness.
Yes.
A lot of us have recently, and I'm a little ashamed to say this, have recently come to realize that's the problem. That's part of the friggin' problem right there. Like, and you've known this all along, but you didn't conclude, hey, that's simply the problem, or that's enough of the problem to get to. You've decided to not only be a professor, but then to be a pastor and now a politician. See, I'm one too, so you can alliterate. But you're sort of moving in all three of these areas and of these sectors, of these disciplines, of these industries. You're in the higher education industry, which a lot of people turn to at times. And you're in the religion world, which people turn to at times. And now you're in the political world, which people turn to. And I think you're like this perfect embodiment of realizing the answer's not in any one of those. It's got to be in all of those. And I don't know, and in private private businesses and all the rest of it too. But do you have any just thoughts or comments on that idea that for some of us who are in our own spaces, we're like, the role of masculinity, patriarchy, and whiteness in America, that's at the root of so much of this. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, if you're going to start there, you have to keep going. Am I sort of getting that right?
Absolutely. I was just at a talk with Angela Blackwell, who is the founder of Policy Link. And one thing that we know for certain is if we don't address, quote unquote, America's original sin in regard to slavery and genocide, then we really are building off of a foundation that's flawed, right? Many times we go back to those documents, whether it's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And yes, they are very aspirational documents, but we have to peel back the layers. For whom are they aspirational? Wow. And if you don't address that, even then the diversity and inclusion of all people was not the intent. If we don't start there, then everything that emerges from it becomes flawed just like it, right? So knowing this and being able to even have conversations, in some ways it blows the minds of my students, right? They have not necessarily sat with critical legal studies or even American history, right? To ask the questions, why is policing the way that it is today? Well, most of policing, when we think about it in the South, it was started to round up runaway slaves. And so there's already a race and class dynamic that's embedded in what policing looks like. When we look at policing in the Northeast, it was started as a way to deal with immigrant labor. So again, the way that it manifests today is still very much rooted in that. When we look at policing in the Southwest, it was rooted in protecting those who were on the frontier, who represented the state in response to those who were indigenous to the land, trying to protect their land. So those kinds of power structures and power plays are very much in the practices that still exist today. The idea that there were actual slave codes that articulated being an African slave meant you could not gather in groups of more than 3, that you could not own a firearm, right? So even in Ohio, where we have young people like Tamir Rice, who is in an open carry state, regardless of whether people saw him as an adult or a young man, he's legally in an open carry state, which means anybody has the right to carry firearms, but not if your subconscious has already told you that these particular bodies of people are not considered, or that the law does not apply to these bodies of people. So then we begin to see how, yes, history and the law, the construction of race, the construction of class impacts the way that we even carry out policy, that we carry out legislation, and even culture, right? So
this is so powerful, but you've chosen not to be an activist per se. I mean, I'm not saying you're not an activist in your work. You've chosen these professions that are like, in one way, super institutional, right? Higher education, you're a professor, a tenured professor. You pastor a church, one of the old institutions. You know, I do too. But even no matter how kind of young and hip our churches are, they're like, I don't know, like they meet every week and they've got budgets and they have things and we're in places and repeating patterns. And then you're going to run for Congress as a congresswoman, and then to run as a senator. These are deep institutions. Can you just talk a little bit about the passion you have as an activist, an activator, and then the turn into these professions of that are, you know, institutional in their vibe?
Absolutely, yes. So I came to academia because there was a program funded and ran by the United Negro College Fund, UNCF, as well as Andrew Mellon Foundation. And there were a small group of African American and Hispanic scholars in institutions that recognize we are never going to get to a place of parity. We are never going to get to a place of justice and equity if we aren't training up more academics to transform the academy. Wow. So Audre Lorde is a phenomenal womanist scholar, poet, everything. Yeah. And she says that our very being is radical and transformative, right?
Just by showing up.
Just by showing up. It changes the ripples of the energy, the wavelength, the whatever in the space, just by showing up. These institutions weren't designed for our participation, right? Higher education was not designed for my participation. The church, as we know it historically in the United States, like African people were relegated to specific space and they could not gather together to even do worship, right? Like there were laws against it. So these spaces were not designed. Congress clearly was not designed for us to be in this space. So my work and the choice to be there is indeed transformative. I move from a place of this is the structure that we have right now. I know that all of them can be more honoring of human dignity and decency. We can recognize the diversity of our existences, and we can have the humility of being that makes them inclusive and equitable for everybody that is participating in the space. I have always in my spirit the hope for who I know we could be, even if we haven't gotten there yet.
That's incredible, frankly. And I'm sure you hear this a lot because you're a hope-filled person. People ask, like, what sustains that hope? Like, what are you seeing? And maybe you're just temperamentally hopeful. I feel a bit of that. So, it's like, I don't know, it's just there. But is there something that makes you even, and I'm not just talking about since, November 2016, but just in the environment that we're all in, is there something that makes you feel like, are you seeing something right now that's boosting that hope, or are you spending out of your hope savings account?
So there are two answers, and not disparate answers to that. The alternative to be hopeless is a kind of hell that I don't want to exist in. Right? Wow. And to know that even in these complicated spaces of oppression, there is some level of privilege, right? I just watched this weekend When They See Us by Ava DuVernay that tells the story of the Central Park Five. If you haven't seen it, watch it, but do the self-care that is necessary to watch that episode. I don't, from a deep spirit space, when it comes to my faith, I don't have the luxury to not move in hope when I know that there are people who are still suffering in ways that that's unimaginable, that is dehumanizing everything. The other part to the answer of this question is the last election cycle, where we elected more women than we've ever seen in Congress. The last election cycle where more people woke up and began to invest in campaigns and not just campaign, but even the work in their communities in ways that they haven't done it before. That is also an indicator that we are progressing, even if it's not moving at the pace that many of us would like.
Yeah, I have this little image in my mind of the way a top spins, and when a top is spinning this way, it also can move across the table. And if you mark any spot on the top, it's moving backward at times before it comes, but it still has this direction going that way. And I just keep hoping that it's the overall direction of the top and not just the rotation of the spin. that sort of keeps me hopeful. But and people like you, honestly, in all honesty, do. So in light of all that, right? This you recognizing how you, when you show up as a woman, as a Black woman, as an educated Black woman in spaces of education, as an instructor and pastoring, as a leader and a founder and running for Congress, when you show up, that changes the story, and it does things, it activates it. How's that going in Colorado? Right? Because Colorado has this sense that, it's a complicated place, has lots of progressives, but frankly, I'm part of the kind of white subset progressive crowd, and we tend to talk a good game and then get real skittish whenever you have to put up money, or you have to put up time, or you have to make a change, or you have to do something else. Then, it's sort of all the other fears come up to even white progressive types. And Colorado's a complicated place. How is it landing with you both when you ran, for the House seat in Colorado Springs, El Paso County area, and now running statewide?
So we do experience those challenges, even from the liberal-minded, progressive communities that have this hope, but don't always have the action behind it. We face that, especially at the beginning of our first campaign, where even for the yearning of difference and change, there was so much devastation and despair in the Democratic Party. I am a Democrat. That because we had never won this seat before since the construction of this district, that we spent more time convincing people that it was possible.
Wow.
And that you don't win any race that you don't show up for, right? So we spent a lot of time on the front end of that campaign, just even getting people to imagine that it was possible.
Yeah.
And again, you see what we were able to do. We were one of the least funded campaigns in the state. When we think about statewide and Congress, we were one of the least funded campaigns. Everything we did was grassroots, from people who committed to this work collectively. We had $360,000, and again, garnered 126,000 votes. So maybe like $3 per vote.
That's incredible.
And it changed the dynamic. It changed the narrative. Yeah. I was just at a county meeting this past week. And again, it is in one of the most conservative parts of the state, in Teller County. And they had both me as well as a candidate who was running for CD5. Last year, when I was having conversations with the same group, so many were scared to even knock the doors of their neighbors because they're like, it's one of the most gun intense or condensed populations in the state. So like it's a high propensity of people who own guns and that possess conservative values. So they were so scared to even knock the doors of their neighbors. But this year in this conversation and just talking to the candidate who is now going to run for the district, they were like, you have pretty big shoes to fill. Like there are some expectations that, and again, that's not to me, but it's the shift that the people themselves have been able to make about what they desire for this district. So I think that Colorado, again, as a very interesting place that could elect at the same time a John Hickenlooper and Cory Gardner, or that went for Bernie at one point and still, still have very much conservative values in some areas. I think that there is a shift in the conversation. I think that the conversations that we are having are complex, not complicated, but complex. Nice. And we have to recognize this is a genuinely purple state. It's not easy being the Black woman Democrat running here. because you have the standard stereotypes, right?
Yeah, right.
Are Black women electable for a state that is predominantly white? I believe so, because I believe Colorado is capable. I believe that Coloradans can rise above and will rise above. We elected the first openly gay governor. We have a majority in terms of women in our House legislature. So I think that Colorado, like the kind of people who live here, they need to have the conversation. You definitely need to sit down with them, not once, but multiple times. But I do believe that Colorado is capable.
So tell us what you need to be helpful, because a lot of us hear that people run for Senate and hear about them. Most of us don't know anybody who's ever run for Senate, right? We don't even know who our own senators are. I've never met them. It feels like an other person altogether. So we don't even know what they need. It feels like, boy, if you could run for Senate, you must sort of have everything you already need, which is not true. All right. So I know Shelley and I are in, like, we live in Minnesota, but we're in as financial contributors to what you're doing. So obviously you need money,
Yes.
and you need a little bit of it, or do you need a whole lot of it? Like, are you doing
a whole lot of it from a whole lot of people?
Good.
Because we are committed to not taking corporate PAC money. So we need individuals who recognize that this race is important for Colorado, but it's important for our country. If we want to actually have a government that is passing legislation, we have a majority in the House, but there are bills that continue to get killed because Mitch McConnell won't even bring them to the floor.
Yes.
So this Senate race is important to our nation, to the country. So I need you in Minnesota. I need you in Alaska. I need you in Florida and Hawaii, wherever you are, to invest in this campaign. And if you are able to invest the maximum per race, and that is $2,800. So the primary and the general, you can max out both times. Please do that.
And frankly, each person can do that. Like, a lot of us think about our budgets as a family affair, but each individual can contribute $2,800. Because sometimes people just have no idea. I get an email. I get probably 10 a week from very wealthy people running for president who ask me for $5.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes it makes it seem like, oh, do you know how you can become the president? Ask people for $15. Or you get Bernie Sanders out there, who's famous for saying this, and now everyone does. Our average donation is, $22.
Yes.
It makes people think that it's setting the price, right? It's like, oh, that's how much it is. It's like you go to a movie and you're like, a movie's $12? That's how much I contribute to a candidate.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that you wouldn't take $12. Of course you would take $12.
Take $12. And if you can budget us in like you budget your Starbucks money once a month, that's even better.
Even better.
We would take $12 a month for the next 16 months or so.
But just so we know, when people when they did finance reform and they wanted to put limits on how much money people could spend, which is a big question, whether that's the right thing to do or not, they didn't set it at like $100. They set it at $2,800.
Correct.
So somewhere between the $5 ask from a presidential candidate in my email 10 seconds ago and $2,800, that kind of gives you the picture. And I just think it's helpful for people to know. Can you tell me that? So they could do that now, and you have a primary coming in July next year, June or July?
It's in June. They can do that now.
A year from now.
Yes. And we need you to do that now. But also remember when we have a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren saying that, because two things are happening. One, they have 7 million people giving $27. So that's the second thing. Amplification is also what we need. If you have connections, everybody has a network. If you can get 5 other people to give $27, that's important. That's just as important as someone who can max out at $2,800. Amplifying who we are. allow this campaign to be the campaign that you really hone in and focus on, that you share in all of your social media networks, that you are harassing people by text messages, that you are calling on media like CNN and Rachel Maddow, like, why don't you have this woman who's phenomenal on your
CNN.
show?
Hey, CNN, what are you doing? She's great. She's great on TV. Look at her right there. Okay, so just a word about what does that money get spent on for you? So, and then we'll shift to all the other things that people can do, because there's going to be a lot, whether they live in Colorado or not. But just so people get a picture, for someone like you running to seek the nomination, the Democratic nomination first, and then you'll be the general election candidate in 2020, and then you'll be a seated senator in January of 2021. What does that money go for? What does a Senate candidate spend money on? People think that you just take a salary or something. I don't know what they think, but what does it go for?
That's why I still work full time as a professor, because even though the FEC allows it, I do not take a salary. Every single dollar from this campaign goes back into the campaign. And I also am a recurring contributor to the campaign. So I'm also putting money into the campaign. So we have 64 counties in Colorado.
Okay.
And right now, one tank of gas for me is it's averaging out at $36 a tank of gas, which gets me like 400 miles on my car. So part of it is going a lot to gas. My gas bill has gone up. I live 15 minutes from my job and even 15 minutes from the church. So my gas bill has gone up to like $300+ a month. Mm-hmm. And I do that. I contribute that in kind to the campaign.
But that'd be a fun thing for someone to think about. Like, hey, I'm going to contribute. I'm going to pay for the gas in the tank.
Absolutely.
I'm going to put literally $300 a month to get so Stephanie can be traveling around and looking face to face and talking to people.
Absolutely. The average price, people are asking right now, when are you opening an office? When are you opening an office? The average price for space in Colorado Springs, and we will have to open multiple offices by the end of this, 64 counties, is $1,000 for rent. And that doesn't include utilities, because people want to gather as well. Unfortunately, you can't run a Senate campaign out of your home, right? Volunteers want to come. That energy energizes other people. Another expense, thank you, Democrats, the National Democrats, is
a big one.
Is the database system for connecting with voters here. It is $20,000 to get access.
This is huge. So you have to pay $20,000 a user fee so that you have access to the official voter information. And that money helps. However they're spending it. It doesn't matter. What's happening for you is you have to come up with $20,000 just to be in the game. Which is
another way that we stifle diversity and inclusion for different voices at the table. If you can't raise that, and yes, they do. They're like, well, you can pay it in installments, and we'll do $2,500. That's still $20,000 on top of having to hire staff. This campaigns, they are entrepreneurial. You create jobs for individuals, whether those are field directors, the finance directors, all of that. And some of us actually want to pay interns, right? We don't want to live off of the backs of free labor.
Yeah.
As we have a history of that. So those are the things. The last thing, I'm sitting here stuffing envelopes, printing and postage. Again, we're a very grassroots campaign. So we have not spent a lot of money and probably will not spend the same amount of money in media. They are saying from a national level that this race is going to cost $15 million because they expect people to spend that money in advertising on television and stuff like that. We are really trying to connect with people person to person, belly to belly. So we will do media, but we won't spend it in that way, because just pouring into corporations is not how I think that people win campaigns.
Yeah, you're saying you don't want to just give a bunch of money to TV and radio stations and newspapers and have it fill their coffers, who build an entire income stream around election years. Yeah,
I would rather spend it in gas.
All right, so people, if we know people in Colorado, you could use their help. I would imagine you'd like to have them around you. So all these Colorado friends that we have. You should go over right now to stephanieforco.com.
Yes.
And get signed up. All right. So what would they do if they helped you? How do people help a startup Senate candidate?
Absolutely. You can help by organizing meet and greets. Again, there's 64 counties. Your network, if you are willing to open the door and just for low cost or no cost, invite people into your home and invite us to come so that we can meet and talk and have these conversations. That's a way that you can help. You can help by being an amplifier. If you are extremely good on social media or whatever your genius is, we need your talent. If you want to volunteer so that I can be on the phone doing phone calls, I'm stuffing envelopes right now.
Love it.
So stuffing envelopes is a way to help, writing postcards, all of the different ways, time, talent, treasure. If you're like, Stephanie, I know that I'm here in Colorado Springs and you have to drive to Grand Junction. Can I ride with you?
Yeah.
Because I know you're tired. Right?
Yeah, right. Can I keep you company? Hey,
Right.
and I can almost imagine too, you being a professor and a pastor, working pastor, that people could say, "Hey, we need someone to say something at my church. You can come in and give a Sunday sermon at a couple of those big churches." Yeah, I'm talking to all of you, my big church friends,
Yes.
and you can you can talk about other things. You're not gonna you won't defile their pristine pulpits by talking about something as important as having just fair laws.
I will not talk about democratic policies in your pulpit.
Yeah, no, you just talk about maybe what Jesus says about how we should treat each other, and if those two things happen to look a lot alike, well, that's not your problem. Okay, so people can do that. They can show up places, and really they have to help you in the primary. And this is what a lot of us, I get it. Most people don't pay attention to politics. They don't even know that there's a dozen people running to try to get the official endorsement of the Democratic Party to win the primary nomination process to be the Senate candidate that can carry the banner from the Democrats. So first you have to win that. So what's super important at this point is to get people who believe that their friends are involved in Democratic politics at all to know that you're in the game, that you're in the running, and that you're someone they should be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Right now is so critical. I've had direct conversations with national entities, and they have been clear that they are going to put their thumb on the scale. And many of the ways that they determine which candidate to pour their support into, when I say support, I mean real dollars, like millions of dollars that they will pour their support into to make the scale heavier on one side. It starts from, what does your fundraising base look like? If they don't see you as viable, then they will not choose you. What does your grass on the ground movement look like? If you don't have 1,000 volunteers in your database, then they will not see you as a viable candidate. And that's another way to filter out diversity in the conversation. So we need you early. Most people know Emily's List as an organization, but the name is an acronym, and it says early money is like yeast. Early money makes the dough rise.
I did not know that's what Emily's List stands for. Yes. And that's a national organization that supports women candidates.
Yes.
Are you an Emily's List?
I am not an Emily's List endorsed candidate right now because, again, they look for.
Oh, I see. They even see, because what it seems like to outsiders is that it's groups like that are helping grassroots candidates come to the surface. But really, what you're saying is they're jumping in sort of once someone has reached a level of viability. Yes. The grassroots thing is what you're doing now. That's why, just to be clear, you're not running. Your election is not this November.
No.
The primary election is next June
Correct.
2020, and then the election in 2020. So some people are like, oh my gosh, we're talking about politics already. Why don't we take a year off? Which drives me crazy. I hear this all the time. News pundits and like people that are in the media, they're like, oh, can't we have a break from politics? Well, not if you're running for office, you can't have a break, because this is where you have to do that work. Like, there's a lot of reasons that things stay as the status quo, and asking for true democracy from the grassroots up and then not wanting to engage until June or July before an election. Those two are such a mismatch that they're actually canceling each other out. So get involved in this one. This is a great one. Stephanie, you're a fantastic candidate, of course. And do you have a different view of Colorado just from this process, having run now in the election a year and a half ago or a year ago?
I do. I really do. Colorado is not the typical stereotype that people tend to think about when we focus our minds on Colorado.
Like stone skiers is not all there is traveling around the hills of Colorado.
There's such a diversity and richness of people who live in Colorado. One of the things that Chimamanda Adichie says, she's a Nigerian writer, it's not that stereotypes are untrue. It is that stereotypes are incomplete. Wow. Running for office allowed me to see how incomplete those narratives are about who Coloradans are. So yes, this is a very different place. And if you have the ability and can come to Colorado and help travel those 64 districts, I would love to go around with you and just to see the kind of diversity that we have here, the opportunities that we have here in Colorado as well.
And we're going to actually do that, you and I, looking like July 12th might be a date when we're going to pull this together. So more information coming on later. But if we do it right, we might do a little thing together in July and try to get some people, raise some money, talk about StephanieForCo.com campaign, of course. Also vote common good and other things going on. So if you're around, and look, I'll just promise all of you, brand promise here. If you get Stephanie in your presence, you're going to be all in, and you're going to your friends are going to feel good about it. You're going to feel good about politics again. Frankly, you're going to feel good about yourself. For some of us, which doesn't happen all the time. So do that. Invite Stephanie to something. Go with her when she invites you to something. Contribute some money. Show up. Spread the word around Colorado. This could be super, super exciting. And I have no expectation that you'll remember me when you reach your finest glory. But that's what I'm afraid you're going to be. There was a guy with hats. Who was that guy with hats? And then some fellow with a hat will come by. But I think this is so worthwhile because I think you're the kind of person that we should have in office, and the person that should represent not only the people of Colorado, but increasingly our politics are not only local, but they also represent this national story and this national narrative. And it just is so important and so great. So I'm all for it. I think this is fantastic. And congratulations. And thanks for talking to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate you.
Fantastic.